Good afternoon, Robert Scribbler here, and let's go ahead and take a little pro-democracy, pro-real freedom, and pro-climate action walk on the beach here over at Jeanette's Pier once again. And I love Jeanette's Pier. It's freaking awesome. It's stilts here for wind turbines and the science that goes on there and all the fun and recreation that goes on at Jeanette's Pier as well. We're going to get into a little bit of a more serious subject as I take a little pro-democracy, pro-climate action, and pro-freedom walk on the beach with you guys. So let's take a little walk on the beach here. So recently there's been some events that I just wanted to talk with you guys about, both in the United States and around the world. And I'm also going to talk about the intersection between climate action and pro-democracy and authoritarianism and anti-climate action. And we'll just talk about the intersectionality of those political forces in the U.S. and around the world. And I served in the U.S. military for 8 years as a member of the U.S. Army National Guard. I did not serve what I would consider to be an illustrious career, but I am proud of my service nonetheless. And the reason why I'm proud of my service is because I stood on that line to defend the free democracy and the government of we the people that I hold dear. A government that has looked forward to the future and over the generations done more and more and more to liberate not only its own people and to enlighten not only its own people, but to liberate and enlighten the peoples of the world. And many of the strongest Americans, many of the Americans whom I admire the most, from Washington to Lincoln to, in some respects, Reagan. There's a lot of things about Reagan's policies that I did not like, but one of the wonderful things about Reagan is he saw the United States as a force for democracy and promoting democracy and liberating peoples around the world. And this is a sentiment that was carried forward through all U.S. presidents up until 2016 when Donald Trump was elected. And Donald Trump changed the nature of the Republican Party to a party that at its core has promoted reaction against science, reaction against doing what is right for the climate, and helping to build up U.S. industry in the form of clean energy industry, and reaction against the liberating force of American democracy. And these two reactions, I think, are linked. They're linked in a kind of small-minded way of thinking, a very cynical way of thinking that seems to think that we can't progress, that progress is, and progress for science, for real freedom, and for the care of our earth, that these efforts, these endeavors are doomed to failure. And that the only real activity that occurs at a individual, at a business, and at a government level is the cynical quest for power and accumulating power for oneself, as opposed to using one's power for the betterment of not only the individual, but for others as well, which I believe is an American value. And to look on to the next thing. And so as you learn how to use the tools of government to liberate people and to promote enlightenment and progress, there's a learning curve, there's a learning process, there's a way of expanding that forward momentum, of expanding, as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe toward justice and toward enlightenment and generally just toward betterment. We, as a result, though, of Trump's failures, Trump's fascism, Trump's authoritarianism, Trump's backward ways of thinking, and it's not just Trump, I mean, he just channeled it. We've suffered. We suffered an attempt, a fascist attempt, to overthrow our good government, our government of we the people, on January the 6th, and a faction in the US government has exported fascism and fascist attempts to other countries. These exportations of fascism and authoritarianism enabled by authoritarians around the world, primarily Vladimir Putin in Russia. And so recently we had two main events well, the first one I covered on January 6th, because January 6th, the anniversary of January 6th, I celebrate as Democracy Survival Day in the United States. But recently, this weekend, a group of fascists tried to overthrow the democratically elected government of we the people in Brazil. And this attempted overthrow thankfully failed, but it was cheered on by the same forces, the same political forces and the same thugs that promoted Trump in the US. And right now, the US House of Representatives, the Republican leadership, is now in a shambles because of the fascistic influence of a wing of its party. And the same wing of its party is now threatening to cut defense support for the US military to defend democracy at home and around the world. And even as it continues to attack and degrade the necessary actions to defend our climate and the innate momentum that could usher in a new age of US energy leadership by propelling the clean energy revolution forward here in the United States. So I see these two things as linked. I see national defense as linked to defense of democracy around the world, particularly since the US military is a force for real freedom and democracy in the United States and around the globe. And I see the efforts to propel clean energy here in the United States as linked to defending democracy and as linked to defending a government that supports enlightenment and progress and the government of we the people. And so as we have seen attacks by fascists supported by these reactionary forces in both the US and Brazil, and as we see the continued efforts by some in the Republican Party to degrade clean energy action and climate action, we, I think, should turn our eyes to them and hold them accountable for their wrongs against us, and not to look away, not to deny, but to be clear-eyed and to look forward and to do the things that we need to do, which means overcoming these reactionary forces at home, overcoming fascism at home, labeling domestic terrorists for what they are, and the criminals who support them, and holding them accountable, not for revenge, but for justice and for defense of a government of we the people. A sacred democracy that has risen up out of the great darkness of tyranny and oppression that has dominated much of human history. And we cannot let go. We cannot let go of our love of real freedom and democracy and our love of real progress in this country. And our quest for continuing enlightenment and continuing to move the arc of the moral universe toward justice. So thank you for joining me, and please stand with me in both standing to protect the climate, in standing to protect these beautiful coastlines, and in standing to protect the wonderful democracies of we the people that enable and empower so many of us around the world, and that are threatened now in places like Ukraine, Taiwan, and yes, recently in Brazil and even in the United States. So thank you for joining me, and I will be back with you shortly.